Hey there everyone. This is video number one of a four-part video series that I'm looking to roll out on my nutritional approach to extreme endurance training, more specifically in my case, ultra marathon running. I follow what most would consider a higher fat approach, but I kind of do it in what I would consider a slightly different way. Kind of the way I look at it is when I'm training for a specific race, I'm working through different phases in training, and those phases may include like early stages of kind of base building, and then getting into some little more like peak-based training phases, some specified training geared towards the event I'm training for, and then tapering, the race itself, and recovery. So when you kind of look at that holistically, during each one of those different phases of training, I'm kind of living a different lifestyle. If you look at what I'm doing from an activity standpoint, when I'm resting and recovering from an event, that looks a lot different than when I'm in like my peak training mode. So for that reason, I don't do the exact same thing day in and day out all year long. I definitely do what I would call periodize my nutrition to kind of match the lifestyle I'm currently living. And the way I do that is I try to set myself up in a way that I am as fat adapted as I need to be in order to minimize my needs to access a more finite energy source like glycogen, but not necessarily at the expense of not being able to use glycogen or carbohydrates, because at the end of the day, those are fast-acting fuel sources that I think have a valuable use in training and racing. So this first video is going to focus on that first phase, which I call the rest and low intensity phase. So this would kind of go along with like after a big race, and as you like feel recovered from that race, you kind of start building things back up very slowly. And I'm gonna kind of talk about what my nutritional approach looks like during that phase. So during that phase of my training, my energy demands and needs are very much lower than what they will be later on. So I look at this as a very good opportunity to remind my body that fat should be its primary fuel source. That fat is that somewhat infinite source of energy that your body has access to if you allow it to through your nutrition and your training. So during this phase, I drop my carbohydrates really, really low, and it would be kind of close to what you might see in a more specific ketogenic diet outline, or like a more traditional Atkins style nutrition plan. So how does that kind of look? I would say during this phase of my training, I'm probably going down to 5%, maybe even sometimes lower carbohydrate. So for most folks, that's very, very low. It's puts me in a state where if I test my ketone levels, whether it's through a blood strip or for like a ketonics breath meter, I'm pretty much in ketosis almost all the time during this phase. And it's an interesting phase in training because for one, my appetite doesn't tend to be quite as big because I'm not training as hard. And it also tends to be a little less ravenous too, because whenever I'm eating really high amounts of fat and very low amounts of carbs, I tend to just be a little more satiated, less hunger cravings throughout the course of the day. And the way that kind of looks is in the early stages when I'm not training as much and not taking in as much overall fuel, I don't really feel very good eating like multiple meals a day. And what I mean by that is like 3 meals plus snacks, which you maybe see traditionally in most people's diets. When I'm in that lower intensity rest phase, I feel a lot better when I'm eating like 2 real solid meals during the day. And I think that kind of gives my digestive system a chance to kind of rest between those meals, and also kind of give it a little bit of a break from just eating so much food like what you tend to need to do when I'm in peak training and running and exercising in the gym and mobility work of upwards to 20 hours a week. So a lot of times I'll start the day with maybe a cup of coffee or tea, put some like coconut milk in that tea, or sometimes almond milk, and I'll stay away from any type of sweeteners or sugary type things in that coffee, and that's kind of how I'll start the day. And I very much do listen to my body. If I'm at a point where like I wake up in the morning and I'm hungry, I'm not gonna kind of fight that. I'll definitely eat earlier. But more often than not during this phase, I don't really develop much of an appetite until the later hours of the morning. So that's usually when I'll have my first meal. And being that this phase is heavily focused on fats, I'll tend to favor food groups that are high in fat, moderate levels of protein, and very low, if not non-existent, almost in carbohydrates. So, a couple go-to meals I'll do a lot is, scrambled eggs, bacon and eggs type of things, omelets. Sometimes I'll have leftover food from the night before. If I do like a stir fry where I have some like dark leafy greens, broccoli, asparagus, that type of stuff mixed with really high fat cut of meat, like a tri-tip steak, or if it's not a super high fat version of meat, then I'll usually supplement that with some type of high fatty oil. Personally, I like to cook with like coconut oils, or different fatty type sources of oils that are have higher smoke points, so that I'm not kind of turning those fats rancid in the process of the cooking. And usually when I have a meal like that, I feel very satiated, and I don't anticipate a hunger pain coming until later that day, especially like I said before, when I'm in a much lower intensity phase of training. As dinner time, I guess from a more traditional standpoint, rolls around, that's usually when I'll start getting kind of hungry again, and I would say that's the meal of the day where I invest the most time into in terms of cooking and preparation. Part of that is just I'd love to spend an hour cooking every meal I make, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of stuff to get done. So I try not to like over-invest myself in the art of cooking, but I do enjoy it enough where I try to block out one meal a day when I'm at home to kind of a full-scale prepping and cooking of a meal. And a lot of times this is when I'll prepare a lot of non-starchy vegetables that I kind of alluded to before. I like to focus on a lot of the dark leafy greens, and a lot of fermented type of vegetables, whether that be like kimchi or sauerkraut, or if it's something I've been really preparing for, I'll ferment some of my own foods, which can range from like carrots to beets and things like that. But more often than not, it's got a dark leafy green type of source in it, and kind of like with my meal earlier in the day, I'm gravitating towards some of the higher fat oils and type of like mayonnaises. Personally, I don't really like a lot of the mayonnaise that's on the market today, although as like the higher fat approach has gotten a little more popular, there's been a lot more options that I'm in more favor of, that tend to stay away from some of those more industrialized vegetable oils and skew towards things like an avocado oil based mayonnaise. So that's something I'll definitely focus on as I'm preparing that meal and include it in the final product. A lot of times I'm looking to get a meat source, especially at night, into that meal, and I eat a pretty diverse set of meats. I like to kind of rotate it, so I'm getting it from a lot of different types of sources, and this will include things like grass-fed beef, a whole chicken, not just like a certain cut like the breast or something like that. Steak is the one that I'll prepare a lot at night because I have that little more time, and personally I like to grill it if I have the opportunity to do that. Salmon is another big one that I'll try to rotate in there on a weekly basis to try to get just a little bit of a different meat source. And usually I'll mix that, like I said, with quite a bit of non-starchy vegetables, and that's usually something that keeps me quite satiated throughout the rest of the evening and nights before I wake up the next day. So like I kind of alluded to in the beginning of this video too, it's like my goal with that approach is to kind of set myself up, similar to in training when you set yourself up for some of the race-specific intensity workouts. You build a strong aerobic base, or you focus on that steady base building phase. That's kind of the same concept here. I'm setting my body up to be very, very good at metabolizing fat during the parts of the training where I don't need a high octane fuel source to get the job done. So by putting myself in that position, I'm putting myself in a spot where my body is very comfortable metabolizing fat. And then when I do start reintroducing a little more carbohydrate sources later on in training, as things get more higher volume, higher intensity type of stuff, I have that good, strong, like fat metabolization going for me, in that kind of reminder, that reset in my body, so that when I do bring back the carbohydrates, it's not something that's gonna like really deter my body from still being able to metabolize high rates of fat.